The first input component we're going to talk about is text input, which we use for getting text from the user. It has a bunch of useful props like auto-capitalize, auto-correct, autofocus, and so on. So back in VS Code, I've simplified the code in app component. Here we only have a screen component, and over the next few lessons, I'm going to demo our input components inside this screen component. So let's add a text input. Now look, we have two instances of this component. One instance is defined in React Native gesture handler. The other instance is defined in React Native. This is the instance that we need. So let's import this. Now let's save the changes and see what we get. By default, we don't see anything, but there is actually a text input right here. So we can type something. Now to make this stand out a bit more, we can give it a placeholder. That is the default text that appears in an empty text box. So let's set this to first name. Now we have to manually reload the app because we're currently in the edit mode. So reload. Okay, here's the placeholder. We can also apply a bottom border. That makes this text input stand out a bit more. So here we set the style property to an object with a couple of properties. I'm going to set border bottom color to CCC and border bottom width to 1 pixel. See what we get. Now it's a bit more clear that we are dealing with a text input. In the next lesson, we're going to apply a bunch of pretty styles to this text input and then encapsulate it inside a reusable component. For now, let's not worry about it. So how can we use this text input component? Exactly the same way we use an input element in React. So in this component, we need a state variable to hold the current value of this text input. How do we declare a state variable? Using the state hook. We talked about this in the previous section. So on the top, let's import useState from React. Now, in this component, we call this function. We can give our state variable a default value, like an empty string. If we don't supply this, by default, it's going to be undefined. Now, this returns an array, so we can destructure that and pick the first and the second elements. The first element is our state variable, so first name, and the second element is a function for updating the state variable. We call it set first name. Now, we need to subscribe to the unchanged text event. So whenever the user types something in this text input, we get that text and update the first name. So here we pass a function that takes the current value, the current text in our text input, and then we call set first name to that value. Now to demo this, I'm going to put a text component over here and render the first name. Let's see what we get. So let's type my name. Everything works beautiful. So this is how we use the text input component in React Native. Now let's look at a few useful props. The first one I'm going to talk about is max length. You're probably familiar with this. It's pretty straightforward. We also have keyboard type. This is very useful. We can set it to one of these values. So I'm going to set this to numeric. Now we have to reload the app. If we bring up the soft keyword, we can toggle that using Command and K. Look, we only see numbers. Another useful prop is clear button mode. With this, we can specify when the clear button should appear. This only works on iOS. So if we set this to one of these values, like always, let's see what happens. So the moment I start typing something here, we get this clear button. It only works on iOS. And finally, the last prop I'm going to talk about is secure text entry. If we set this to true, we can capture passwords. Now let me show you a shorthand. If we have a Boolean prop and we want to set it to true, we can simply type the name of that prop. This is exactly like explicitly setting it to true. But here we don't have to type equals true. So save, take a look. We still have a password input box. So I leave it up to you to read about the other props here. Next, we're going to build a beautiful reusable text input component.